Hello everyone, welcome to sqadia.com. I am Hina and today the topic of our lecture is the head and the spinal injuries. Now, what is the medico-legal significance of these injuries? It's very important. Basically, it can lie in three categories. That is accidental, suicidal, and homicidal. So we have to consider all of these significances. This lecture basically comprises of the first section deals with the scalp injuries mainly, which includes basically the injuries to the scalp. The forensic anatomy of the scalp is discussed in detail in this section. And then we'll be moving on to the abrasions, the bruises, and the lacerations, only including the scalp. So the second section basically comprises of the facial injuries and the falls. The facial injuries can be caused by kicking phenomena, and the black eye and the damage to the ear is discussed in detail in this second section. Falls in standing position and falls from a height are also discussed in details in this section. Thirdly, we'll be discussing the skull fractures, and they are discussed. Basically, we'll start off by the anatomy of the skull, which is discussed in detail in this section. And then we'll be moving on to the mechanism of the fracture. How are these fractures formed? Then we'll be discussing the types of the skull fractures. So there are a lot of types that are discussed in detail in this third section. In the fourth section, we'll be discussing the post-traumatic factors that come into play after the trauma has occurred. The force required to cause the fractures to the skull are discussed in detail. And we'll be considering the post-traumatic epilepsy, which is a very common phenomenon after the accident has occurred. The post-traumatic infections are discussed in detail in this fourth section. Then we'll be discussing the spinal injuries in the fifth section in detail. Spine has its own anatomy, and that is discussed in detail in this section, and how it can be damaged through trauma, it is discussed in detail. So first of all, the compression damage, which is a very common phenomena seen in the spine, that is discussed here. The hyperflexion and the hyperextension is also discussed in this section, and we'll be discussing the spinal cord injuries mainly and most importantly in this section. I hope you want to learn more about these head and spinal injuries, so do watch the other sections of this lecture as well. Thank you for watching sqadia.com.